a person who is known to many people in the clean energy community. He's president of Blue Green Canada, which is a movement of labor and environmental groups that have been put together to look at that clean energy future that we all want to see. C'est un avocat de formation qui a milité dans les droits internationaux, les droits humains et aussi le droit de travail. Présentement, il est adjoint au président national canadien du syndicat des métallos du Canada. Alors, de cette façon-là, il remplit des fonctions au niveau de son syndicat aussi. But I know Mark best as just a great friend and a terrific activist. Please welcome Mark Rowlinson as moderator of our first panel.
Well, thank you very much, Peter, for that warm and kind introduction. As Peter mentioned, I work for the steelworkers, but I'm also the president of Blue Green Canada. And Blue Green Canada is an organization of 7 trade unions and environmental organizations. The steelworkers and Unifor on the trade union side, Clean Energy Canada, the Pembina Institute, the Columbia Institute, Columbia Institute, as well as the Broadbent Institute on the sort of environmental side, as well as Environmental Defense, the founding environmental organization. And we've been doing work for the last 5 years to both advance the interests of working people as well as the environment. And again, the premise of our organization really is to some extent what Thomas Mulcair was speaking about, which is that we don't have to choose between good jobs and a clean environment. We don't have to choose between meeting our climate change targets and also building a successful economy for the 21st century. So we're going to start today. We have 5 panelists, each of whom have presentations. We're going to start, and we have some excellent speakers, so I won't belabor the point any further. And I'm going to start by welcoming Merran Smith, who is the Director of Clean Energy Canada and a great partner in Blue Green. Merran leads a team of workers at Clean Energy. I'm sure many of you are familiar with the phenomenal work that they do. She's a 2014 recipient of the Clean 16 Award, which recognizes leadership and sustainability in clean capitalism. And she writes and speaks extensively on the opportunities for Canada in a global low-carbon economy. Please join me in welcoming Merran Smith.
Thanks, Mark, and thanks for inviting me here today, and it's great to see such a wonderful turnout. Bonjour. I have to say I'm from Vancouver and I'm going to speak in English, so I apologize that I'm not as bilingual as I could be. It's really timely to be here today. We just released some research tracking the energy revolution, which tracked global investments in clean energy investment and policy. And today I'm going to talk to you about our 3 significant findings out of this. First, we found clean energy is really big business now, and it's fast becoming the new business as usual in the energy sector. Falling solar and wind prices, strong investor interest, and leadership from governments and businesses are driving a real global clean energy revolution. Second, Canada is doing pretty well in the clean energy sector, thanks largely to the provinces and their leadership. However, with federal engagement, we really could be a world leader in clean energy. And third, without such leadership, we really risk being left behind in the global shift to green energy. We need to, here in Canada, stop thinking that oil and gas is our only competitive energy advantage. Clean energy is where the puck is going, and we feel we really ignore this at our peril. So the story really begins here in China. I'm not sure how we get the slides to move. Am I supposed to do that?
Just say next slide.
Okay. The story really begins here in China. And whenever we talk about China, it's usually about a potential market for us, or it's about the big bad guy who's building a new coal-fired power plant every week. Well, last year, for the first time, China built more renewable energy electricity, more wind and solar plants than they did coal and gas combined. First time in history. And in fact, China's putting up a new wind turbine every hour. Imagine that. Why? There's 2 real reasons. One is air pollution. People are crippled. It's crippling people's lives, and they know that coal is the problem and they need to replace it. And the second is, like most countries, China wants energy security. They don't want to import energy from somebody else. They want to control it themselves. So they now lead the world in investment in wind and solar energy. Next slide, please. So China's manufacturing muscle has really changed the game in the solar industry. The price of a solar module has dropped 83% in less than 5 years. Now that is a game changer. And we're seeing it play out close to home here in the United States. So last year, every 4 minutes, a new solar panel was getting energized, was coming on stream. And you know, I personally was thinking of putting solar panels. I built a house 4 years ago, and I was going to put solar panels on it. You know, my credit line was rising, so I thought I would just delay a few years. I put them on this summer. So what I would have put on 4 years ago, I would have got 2 solar panels. I put them on this summer, I covered my roof, 8 solar panels. That's what this drop has caused. And this technology is now really accessible. Not only is the price drop, but you can now go to Home Depot. They're selling solar panels at your local Home Depot store. And so what this is really adding up to, the IEA this week announced solar will they predict solar will be the biggest source of electricity by 2050. They were not predicting that 5 years ago. So next slide, please. So last year, the total investment in clean energy was $207 billion. Now compare that to fossil fuels, total investment was $270 billion. So they're almost equal now. I think it's really critical to note who is investing. So our major markets, the United States, China, and the EU, are some of the biggest investors in clean energy. They're still buying fossil fuels, but it's significant that they're investing this heavily in clean energy. And why is the money going there? They're the countries that are putting in place policies around renewable energy. They're leveling the playing field for renewables, and that's why the money is going there. And when the money goes there and they start building capacity, they start getting businesses, they get the expertise, they understand how to build it, they start the innovations, and now they have a new product to sell. And that's their clean energy expertise, their clean energy goods and services. And so even Texas, one of the world's largest oil and gas producers, has some strong renewable energy policies, and they are now the leader in wind energy in the United States. Imagine that. Next slide, please. So jobs. There's now 6.5 million people employed in the renewable energy sector worldwide. 2.6 million of those are in China. And just to give you a sense of their investment in solar and why the price of solar is going down, 1.6 million people are working in the PV solar industry in China right now. And so preparing to come here, we like to put together these little factoids, and so we dug into Céline's data to figure out how many clean energy jobs are there in in Canada. So Canada now has 23,700 jobs, direct jobs in the clean energy sector. And we scratched our heads and looked up how many direct jobs are there in the oil sands. Well, there's 22,340, so we now employ more direct people in the renewable energy sector than we do in the oil sands. And just to be clear, when we say renewable, clean energy, we're talking renewable energy. That's wind, solar, tidal, geothermal, and biomass. So we don't include nuclear, which is not renewable. We don't include gas, which is a fossil fuel. So that's pretty exciting. We already have a lot of jobs here in Canada. Next slide, please. So I've talked about policy. Policy is one of the things that drives investment in clean energy, and carbon pricing is one of those policies that helps level the playing field between renewables and fossil energy. Now, I know that carbon pricing is not an easy conversation here in Ottawa for the last few months or even the last few years, but what I want to emphasize with this slide is that no matter how it feels here in Ottawa, carbon pricing actually has momentum around the world. Many of you have probably heard that California and Quebec are going to link through the Western Climate Initiative their cap and trade systems and are going to start auctioning this fall. It's perhaps less well known that China, 6 provinces, and the 6 most industrialized provinces of China are also piloting carbon pricing systems. So again, we added up all the GDP of all these jurisdictions that are pricing carbon. Just for interest's sake, it turns out $33 trillion of the global GDP is covered today by a carbon price. That is 44% of the globe's GDP is right now paying a price on carbon. So I'm not saying that they're all the perfect prices on carbon and that they're meaningful, but this isn't a boutique or a niche thing or a West Coast thing or a fringe thing. When close to 50% of the globe's GDP is paying it, it's becoming normalized. Next slide, please. And so it's not just governments who are leading in clean energy. Mainstream brands like Walmart, Starbucks, IKEA, Google, Facebook, they have all committed to be powered 100% by renewable energy by 2020. And these companies are doing this because this is what their customers want. And also because it makes good business sense. These are corporations that think of the bottom line. Their assessment is that clean energy and energy efficiency in the long run is going to cost them less than the status quo. Next slide, please. And so if that's where the globe's going, where does Canada fit in? Canada's really a mixed story in clean energy. The good news is 65% of our electricity is already clean. That's hydro, wind, solar, and tidal. And last year we saw $6.5 billion of those dollars were invested here in Canada. And Canada was ranked 7th in the G20 for clean energy investment. But here's the bad news, especially given where you work here in Ottawa. Canada's progress is due largely to leadership from provinces like BC, Ontario, and Quebec. And Ottawa's attention in recent years to clean energy has been focused elsewhere, as we all know. So if Canada's clean energy is a success story today, what could it be? Where would it be if Ottawa stepped up to the plate? And that's really part of our message here. And I liked, as Tom Mulcair said this morning, imagine if we invested in this. I think we could be world leading, but I'm a biased Canadian. However, McKinsey, a global consulting group, also thinks we could be world leading. In their assessment that they did in 2012, commissioned by Natural Resources Canada, they pointed to Canada's clear advantage in hydro, but also said that we could potentially take a lead in solar photovoltaics, bioenergy, unconventional hydro, and energy efficiency. Next slide, please. And so what does Canada need to do to compete and win? Well, the first point is there is a crucial role for Ottawa in supporting clean energy. And we're sometimes asked, well, if clean energy is so great, then why does it need subsidies? Why does it need government support? And here's a few answers. First, clean energy is currently competing on an unlevel playing field, where the fossil fuel sector is not paying for the price of carbon pollution, health impacts, etc. And secondly, I think it's really important for us to remember that every major industry in Canada has got off the ground. From the oil sands to the aerospace industry, every industry has got off the ground with targeted federal support. And so we believe Ottawa needs to provide that similar level of support to the clean energy sector. And in closing, just if we step back for a minute and look at the big picture, our energy future is going to look very different than it does today. I think the energy revolution is going to be a bit like the communications revolution. You know, who at Bell or TELUS was thinking 20 years ago that we would all be walking around, and I didn't bring mine up here, but with little boxes that were phones? And who was making a plan that entire countries like Nicaragua, Cambodia, much of Africa would actually leapfrog landlines and go to cellular telecommunications? Who saw that and who had that in their plan? And I think the energy is on the cusp of a similar type of transformation. It will be very different than the communications revolution. There's a lot of infrastructure in energy. It's going to be slower to change it out. But you know, microgrids, smart grids, rooftop solar, distributed energy, they're going to make our energy future look very different than it does today. And we don't need to fear that change here in Canada. There's huge opportunities for Canada this, and we're endowed with a wealth of strong renewable resources and with strong human resources. So we need to stop ignoring the growing clean energy revolution globally and put in place the support to become the leaders that we can be in this clean energy shift. Thank you very much, and I really look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Merran. So we'll take questions and comments after we've heard from all 5 speakers. And next, I'd like to introduce Céline back. Céline is the president of Analytica Advisors, as well as a founding partner of the Canadian Clean Technology Coalition, as well as a recipient of the Clean 16 Award, which recognizes her contribution to building sustainable capital markets in Canada. Please join me in welcoming Céline.
Bonjour, messieurs, dames. Je vais garder à l'œil mes chers collègues qui travaillent avec les matériaux audiovisuels. C'est un grand plaisir d'être avec vous aujourd'hui et d'être ici pour parler de ce moment charnière et transformateur dans l'économie du Canada. We're at a period in the Canadian economy which is a period of great transition and many transformational changes, and this leads to I think the need for us to be together today, the need for us to understand the institutions that we need to build, the knowledge we need to gather, so that we can all be much more comfortable, as Merran says, with making this transformational change. I'm going to speak about the transformation that's occurring within the industrial fabric of Canada today, and I've referred to this as the clean tech edge. C'est à notre avantage, les technologies propres du Canada, l'industrie canadienne de plus forte croissance au Canada. Alors, on commence, s'il vous plaît. So, pop quiz, it's la rentrée parlementaire. You know, we've been here for a couple of weeks. What is Canada's fastest growing industry? Is it beer? Est-ce que c'est le pétrole? Est-ce que ce sont les technologies propres, real estate, or natural gas? And so today, my goal is to enable you to be able to answer this question, and also to enable others to answer the question by helping them understand. So our first, I guess, key point is to move to understanding the frameworks that we use to look at our economy today. So next slide, please. It's the theory that decides what can be observed. C'est la théorie qui nous permet et qui détermine ce qui peut être observé. So our theory, which is the next slide, is the following. Changer le prochain. So GDP, this is our economic theory, and it has three parts that we understand quite well, and one which you have probably heard a lot about that I think we understand less well. GDP is made up of consumer, government, industry, and export. And the color coding of those 4 words is intentional. Le jaune, c'est des domaines où les choses roulent moins bien. So we have completely maxed out consumer debt. Obviously, our governments are indebted. We speak about that a lot at the provincial level. And then industry is sitting on, and you would know this better than me, but $677 billion in cash is what I understood. And no one's proposing to tax that. So the levers of GDP are relatively at the limit, with the exception of the last, which is exports. And exports I think of in 2 buckets, one which is merchandise and the other which is natural resources. And within natural resources there are 2 buckets, one which is oil and gas and the other which is all other. Oil and gas exports in Canada represent 29% of total exports, $129 billion. And to put that in context, our total exports of natural resource, of clean energy is $2 billion. So we have $129 billion of oil and gas exports and $2 billion of clean electricity, which is no doubt going to grow, with important work being done by Manitoba Hydro and in Newfoundland and in Quebec. To the next slide, please. So 5 things to know about Canadian clean technology, bearing in mind what I've just shown you, and I'm going to go through these quickly. So the first is that, next slide, we have, it is the fastest growing industry in terms of revenues, 9% growth last year to $11.2 billion. So keep $11.2 billion in mind. it's near to us all. It's an industrial structure that is unlike others. We don't have large global brands yet. We don't have Bombardiers and Magnas and the larger industrial players are the case in aerospace and automotive. We have 800 companies across the country, some of them which are going to be global brands, and they're all bringing solutions to address these issues. The third point, and they cover a number of sectors, 5 of which Merran just mentioned. If we go to the next slide, we have more and more great jobs. Mr. Mulcair spoke about the need to build middle-class jobs. These are high-paying jobs, and there are 41,000 directly within the company. This rate of growth of employment was 6% last year. That's a very significant rate of growth. It's a very interesting industry in that it is deeply innovative. A cumulative of $5 billion in R&D investment has been made in the sector, and I'll put those numbers in context in a minute. Of the $5 billion that have been invested in the last 5 years, 3.5 has been invested by small companies. To put that in context, Canada invests $7 billion in public sector annually in R&D, and $15 billion annually in private sector R&D. So this is a very significant figure. More context for R&D in Canada. Cleantech's R&D is $1.1 billion, which is only slightly less than aerospace, but significantly more than the cumulative R&D in the sort of purple categories, which are our traditional resource sectors, and actually quite a bit more than the pharmaceutical industry, which we know to be a very innovative industry. It's also intensely competitive, and I use exports as a measure of competition. If you're able to sell clean technology around the world, it is by definition a fact that you are competitive. So if we continue to grow at our current rate, we will have an impressive sector. But as Merran said, unless we name the sector, provide it with a policy framework, we're not going to have the opportunity to build a $30 billion export sector. I'm going to put this in the context of 2 industries, the aerospace industry and the automotive industry, so we can understand the shape of the industry and the economy we have. There are 73,000 jobs within aerospace, 700 companies, $25 billion of revenue. About 70% of it is from exports, and obviously we have global brands in companies like Bombardier. In automotive, which is the next slide. 117,000 jobs. Now, that's 4 times more than clean technology, but it's not 10 times more than clean technology. And you'll notice that the number of companies is not, that different either. It's all within the same scale. R&D is different. It's a lot less because this is a very well-established industry, and exports are 75% of revenues. We obviously have global brands in this sector as well. If we go to the next slide. Our vision for clean technology is something like the automotive industry, and to work with our colleagues in these industries to build an industry that has 100,000 jobs. And this isn't beyond the realm of the possibility. At 41,000 jobs today, we should be able to reach that. At $11 billion in revenue today, we should be able to get to $50 billion. And to do that on the basis of very innovative practices, continuing to invest in R&D, and building global brands with a very significant percentage of those revenues from exports. So if we continue, I'll just give you a quick comparison to Denmark, which is a small country like ours. They have taken an industrial approach to renewable energy. We hear about Denmark being a country that has invested significantly in renewable energy, but we don't necessarily hear about the fact that they have built an export-focused, highly competitive, globally relevant industry, which is based on exporting renewable energy, manufacturing within Denmark, investing in R&D. And I'll just mention the fact that this, as part of those policies that surround that industry, they are providing sovereign guarantees to their companies for exports of new technology so that we can continue to be innovative, because bankers don't lend when there is technical risk. So if we want to export our technologies, by definition, we will have difficulty and we'll need to think about access to debt and to low-cost capital. The other thing that I think you should bear in mind is that Denmark has set 3% of GDP as a target for its R&D investments. That would be $45 billion for Canada. We currently invest about half that, so 22 rather than 45. Next slide. So 3 reasons why we should design the economy we would like to include clean technology as a resilient industry. The first is, on the next slide, is because we have young people who are investing in this industry. 20% of the workforce today is less than 30 years old. This is a significant investment for young people to decide that they want to be part of this industry. Another reason is because we have a $1 trillion market that we're currently operating in, and that market's going to grow to be $2.5 trillion. We have 1% of global market share today. In our share of global trade is 2.6%. So we're batting way below our weight. And if we had 2.6% of the global market when it grows to 2.5 trillion, it would be a $50 billion industry. So these are big numbers that we should feel confident in our ability to attain. It's also important for us to bear in mind that climate finance is aid. And that figure is going to be $100 billion a year. Canada doesn't have, at the moment, an integrated whole-of-government approach, which enables us to think about climate finance in the context of our industrial capacity. So the last reason is, I think, on the next slide, is because this is an opportunity to work together to unify Canadians, to fight for things that we believe in, to fight against climate change and environmental degradation, to bind our country together with companies that are across the country solving important problems, and to have us build economic resilience at the time, in the time of climate change. So thank you very much.
Alors, merci beaucoup Céline. Prochainement, nous avons avec nous, on est très heureux d'avoir avec nous Michel Letellier, qui est le président et chef de la direction de Innergex. Innergex est donc une compagnie chef de file dans l'énergie renouvelable qui développe des projets hydroélectriques et éoliennes tout autour du Canada, en particulier au Québec, Ontario et aussi aux États-Unis. Alors, merci Monsieur Letellier et c'est à vous.
Merci, merci beaucoup. Thank you for being here this morning and listen to us. Next slide, please. I'll try to give you a perspective of a company that basically we're a public company, so we have to make profit, but that we have chosen the path of sustainability throughout our development. I personally started in 1990 in what was called the new era in Quebec for small hydro. At the time, nobody was thinking about renewable energy. It was just an opportunity to make a good use of old hydro facility or old dam that was sitting in Quebec. And nobody was thinking that these things will evolve. Hydro-Quebec was having these little plants, and they were left for nothing. And we decided that it was a good idea to try to develop these. So Innergex was created at that time. So it's been 25 years that we're developing a hydro facility in Quebec. And we've moved on to Ontario and lately in BC. When I say lately, we started in BC in 2000. Time flies these days. So we have now 33 facilities across Canada. We have 26 small hydro, 6 wind farms, 1 solar panel, and 1 plant in Idaho in the States. What is important for us is that we have chosen to be 100% renewable energy. We're focusing on Canada because Canada is our homeland, but that doesn't mean that we wouldn't expand across the world. But we've been lucky enough to be very busy and successful in Canada, so that's why we have been in Canada mainly. I just mentioned we're a public company. Our total assets is about getting close to $3 billion. Market cap a little bit over $1 billion. So as far as Canadian company, it's not small, but in terms of international company, we're a small outfit. But we're thriving, we've been growing, and we're developing still 5 projects that's totaling about $1 billion more investment. Our EBITDA is about $150 million. By the time these 5 projects will be in commercial operation in 2016, we will have double our EBITDA. So those numbers are impressive for a company by itself, but it's impressive also being a renewable energy, and we're not just doubling our EBITDA by buying existing facility, we're building them, we're developing them. But I'll try to focus more on what makes us a little bit different than other company. Next slide, please. So our mission is very simple. We just want to grow our portfolio of renewable energy, but we want to do it on a sustainable way. As I just mentioned, we'll be focusing only on renewable energy, and this is a decision that we have made. People in our industry have grown much bigger in combined cycle, coal, and all kinds of other sources of energy, but we decided to focus on renewable energy. Does the market like it in terms of, I guess, possibility? I guess, yes. I think we're very well priced, very well valued in the Canadian market. But obviously, capital market likes to grow, companies that are growing. But we're doing our best to please them, and so far we have been very well received in the marketplace. Next slide, please. But one thing I'd like to give you as a message today is our vision on how to develop. Like I said, we've been doing it for the last 25 years. I must say that we have made mistakes throughout our development. But the nice thing about it is that we have learned from our mistakes. You always heard that sustainable development, or le développement durable, is the way to go. Well, we're trying to apply it very strongly in our company. Our definition of développement durable or sustainable development goes to an easy way is the 3 P: people, planet, and profit. And I always say to my employees that they're equal. They're 3 Ps and they're equal. We have to think about people, and people means that we have to share. Share through partnership and share the dividend and the profit on project, but also being very open and making a very big difference through imposing to our contractor local job, local trades. And that's easy to say, but that's not that easy to implement, because always a contractor comes and he wants to make profit on the bottom line, and obviously selecting sometimes smaller contractor, local trades are a little bit more complicated. But we're enforcing them, these rules in our contract with them, and so far it works very well. Some examples in places that we've done business in British Columbia, we had up to 40% First Nation workers on our facility. So that was not easy to achieve. There's a lot of investment in terms of human resources, but if one really wants to make a difference, it can be done. Planet, obviously, we want to make sure that we do the right thing. British Columbia, as an example, has the more stringent permitting process throughout Canada, and we make ourselves proud to go even behind some of the constraints that environmental permit are putting on us. So planet is very important as well. And profit. I just mentioned that we're a public company, and I'm always saying to my employees, if we don't make some reasonable profit, we won't be able to attract the capital in order to do these nice projects down the road. And that's the first thing also. We're chatting with the potential partners that we have, First Nation and municipality, but we're open book. We're saying to them, these are our costs, and they're true. You can audit our financial statement, and we want to make a decent profit, a reasonable profit, not an extreme profit, but we have to make a profit at the end of the day if we want to attract capital in order to continue developing sustainable projects. Next slide, please. Just to give you a few examples of what we've done, we're not just talking about partnership with First Nation. We have actually done real partnership with First Nation. We started one actually in Ontario, in Umbata Falls, with the Pick River facility. That's a 23 megawatt hydro facility that we've developed completely from greenfield development with the Pick River First Nation. So it was a great success. They owned 50%, actually 51% of the shares, and we provided 100% of the equity. Why? Well, because the project was a great project. In our own calculation, and we sat down with them, we were able to sell the electricity and make a decent profit, even if we had put 100% of the equity and only owned 49% of the shares. So that was I guess, a very economical project to do at first, but it made good business sense for us to do it as well. We've done Cay Creek in BC most recently, a 50 megawatt facility on a 50-50 basis. But this time it was more competitive, and we had to explain to our First Nation that we needed a preferred return in order to cover the 100% equity. They understood that. And they were looking towards the long-term ownership of the facility, and it was a great success. It was put in commercial operation just last year. We've done also with municipality. We did a 25 megawatt wind farm in Rivière-du-Loup on the same basis, 50-50. This time, the municipality were bringing the cash. It was much easier to do, but we sat down with them, and they own 50% of these shares, and they sit on the board of directors, and they make the decision with us on the construction, development, permitting, and operation. Most recently, we just announced that we're going to start construction this fall on a 150 megawatt wind farm with the Mi'kmaq First Nation in Quebec. A little bit the same principle. They were looking for a partner. They want to be there for the long term, and we are providing the technology, the know-how, and the capital to manage the facility. But they have 50% of the say on the board of directors. Must say that this is not easy all the time. But partnerships are not easy. We have a huge partnership in the wind development in Quebec with TransCanada, and it's not easy. They have their own way, and we have our own partnership. You have to invest in the relationship on long term, and Innergex is committed to do that on a First Nation basis. Next slide, please. So I want to go too long on the commitment for the environmental, and I think that you all know, you're all sold to the idea that renewable energy has low impact, but we strongly believe in it. As an example, in BC, we were a little bit frustrated with the permitting process in BC. It was very long and cumbersome. But we got through that, and there's one aspect. They were asking us for a follow-up on 5 years environmental impact on small hydro. So it was very cumbersome. Just to give you an idea, Ashlew is a 50 megawatt facility in BC that we built. Just to follow up on environmental aspect, per year it was costing more than $500,000 per year just to follow up on environmental study. So for a businessman, $500,000 per year on environmental aspects of follow-up is expensive. But we see it now, today, as a great investment. After 5 years, it turned out that we have no effect on fish. Actually, numbers of fish in the bypass reach of the river have increased over the last 5 years under the operation of the facility. So instead of seeing that as a big liability, now we have more than 6 hydro facilities that have gone through those 5 years and have proven that the small hydro facility in British Columbia have no effect on the fish on the bypass reach. So it's great news for the industry, actually. So we can say to the people that believe that we would have had a great impact on rivers, that actually we don't. And we are sharing this information with the Pacific Salmon Association and working with them towards new ways also to improve and to make sure that wherever we're making an investment, We have also mitigation. Well, now we're not calling them mitigation, we call them enhancement for fish habitat. An example again with Ashley, we have created a 10,000 square meter of fish habitat, and we're creating more than 150,000 small salmon every year at Ashley. So we are feeling very strongly towards economy or profit can be matched with sustainable development throughout our development. Next page. Why renewable energy is needed in Canada? I think that our colleagues are great to promote that. Obviously, I'm a little bit biased because we're doing it. So obviously, I like the idea of creating and having support from the industry. But just to give you or reinforcing what we're saying, we are committed towards sustainability. We're committed to the highest standard of environmental stewardship. And we have to compete, unfortunately, on a market that other players don't have to meet these same standards. So in business, usually, it's really hard to compete. I wouldn't have any problem to compete on the same playing field. But when the other guys doesn't have to apply to the same rules, that's a little bit of a problem I figure out. So hopefully, with your help, we'll have a nicer field to play in the future. And that would be it for me. Thank you.
Alors, merci beaucoup. So next we're going to hopefully try a bit of a technological trick known as the telephone. Dr. Tim Weis, is he on the line? Hey, there we go. Tim, just so you know, we have your presentation, although that's not it. Yes, we have your presentation up on the screen, but you will have to tell the operators, it's Mark Rowlinson here, by the way, moderating the panel. You have to tell the operators when you'd like the next slide. Attention. A slight technical issue. Ils sont tous les deux en français, les présentations, si j'ai bien compris. Tim, just bear with us a second. We're just getting the correct presentations up on the screen. All right. So, Tim, we're having a bit of an issue with your PowerPoint because we seem to only have two versions of a French PowerPoint. So we're wondering, is Ben Thibault on the line?
Yeah, I'm here.
So if it's okay, perhaps we'll go to Ben because I think, yes, so we do have your PowerPoint for your presentation in both English and French. So if it's okay, we'll go with Ben first while we retrieve Tim's English presentation. So, ladies and gentlemen, Ben Thibault is the director of the Pembina Institute's electricity program. He works primarily on renewable energy and electricity policy with a strong focus on Alberta. So please join me in welcoming over the phone Ben Thibault.
So we've already heard, both the opportunities as well as the risks that we won't grasp those opportunities without the more active policy approaches, particularly at the federal level. So, I'm speaking to you from Alberta, so you'll forgive me for being a little bit more of a cloud, a little less of a silver lining just yet. But I'm going to tell a story about the barriers that still exist to renewables, and particularly in the absence of both provincial and federal policy, which is the context we have in Alberta. So I'm not doing this to end us off with a wet blanket, but starts with leading Canada's transition to a cleaner energy future. So just for a minute here, for those of you not familiar with the Pembina Institute, we're an energy and environment think tank. We take a rigorous research and analytical approach to energy and environment policy issues, and really dig into the juicy, nerdy meat of the issues that we discussed. And I focus on one of our key files, which is electricity. So I'll get you the slide, which starts with supply. So our electricity and renewable. But between those four provinces, we have 93% of the carbon emissions of electricity carbon emissions. And this image really shows you why. And I apologize that I'm not sure how big this looks like to you, so I'm not sure what you could see. But the bar on the left for each province shows the generation mixes, and the dark gray is coal. And as you can see, where a province relies on coal and secondarily natural gas, which is the lighter gray, these are the provinces where we see significant greenhouse gas emissions in the bar on the right for each province. And so, just note that, how small Alberta's electricity system is compared to major producers like Quebec, Ontario, and British Columbia, but note that it emits more than 3 times more carbon than any other province from its electricity sector. And I should note that this data is a couple years old, and while it still essentially holds for most provinces, because Ontario ended its use of coal for electricity production this year, while increasing its renewables dramatically, the result is that Ontario's electricity is now much less than half as dirty on carbon grounds than it was in 2005, and even still cleaner than this graph shows, which is from 2011 data. Next slide, please. Says provincial GHG changes. So Ontario's action has supplied considerable GHG reductions to the Ontario economy. It lays claim really to the most effective emissions reduction policy seen to date in, not only Canada, but all across North America. And this demonstrates that tackling the electricity sector really can bring significant carbon reductions. Unfortunately, these significant improvements in other Canadian provinces, led by Ontario, have been wiped out by emissions growth in Alberta. Now, much of this has been oil sands growth, of course, and there's been plenty of attention to that, but it's also because Alberta has failed to take advantage of the really big opportunities that Alberta has to make electricity more cleanly. So I'll show you the next slide, which says that Alberta has more than half of all electricity GHGs. Indeed, if you add up all the electricity emissions from all the other provinces combined, they do not add up to Alberta's electricity carbon emissions. So when we're talking about cleaner electricity in Canada, we're talking about an opportunity in every province and every region of the country, for sure, in terms of jobs, in terms of clean tech investment, etc. But in terms of our climate problem, I put to you that both the problem and the opportunity is really in Alberta, and that's why my work focuses on this province, and that's my excuse for making all of you in Ottawa listen to me rant on about Alberta, about another Alberta fossil fuel issue, which takes me to the next slide. So speaking of which, I include this graph not to give the oil sands a free pass, but to say, in a province where oil sands gets a lot of environmental attention, and deservedly so, it's important not to forget that electricity in Alberta is nearly as bad on carbon. And so while carbon from the oil sands needs to be addressed, it turns out that there are only so many options in the oil sands sector to reduce carbon. So for oil sands, it really comes down to pace and scale of new oil sands development. But on electricity, Alberta really has an abundance of opportunities already to reduce emissions within the sector. Looking to electricity, really be grasping the low-hanging fruit, and this is where reduction should be sought. And again, not to give the oil sands a free pass, but bring more attention to the electricity sector really allows us to reduce carbon in a way that has options readily available for us already. So go to the next slide. It says electricity sector emissions to grow. Unfortunately, reducing carbon from electricity in Alberta is not the trend that we're on right now. So this graph was made by the electricity industry in Alberta itself. It shows that Alberta emissions will actually grow in the next few years to its highest point in history because 2 out-of-service coal units recently came back on last year. And there are then some reductions made when old coal units finally shut down, clustered in the 2020s and 2030s. But then over the next 20 years, emissions steadily grow, and Alberta's power sector will get to another GHG record again in the late 2040s, and then continue to rise thereafter. So, let's just think about that for a moment. This is a publication from Alberta's power industry where the spokespeople were proud of the progress that Alberta's electricity would make. And while we need to reduce carbon everywhere, we can around the world, and Ontario has shown, that the power sector is a really good place to start. Alberta will actually see its highest electricity carbon pollution ever at mid-century. And going into the second half of the century, that trend line doesn't look very promising to me. So as I say, this is the key electricity problem in Canada, but the question is, why is it happening? And more importantly, how can we solve it? So the next slide, federal regulations. Part of why it's happening is that the federal regulations on GHG emissions from the coal sector are weak. And so this graph just shows the blank checks that those regulations are giving to coal units in Alberta. So the width of the bands in each of those, it just shows you how big the units are. Each unit in the province, how big they are in terms of capacity, and then the lengths just show you the lifespan. And so along the bottom there you can see that, basically most of the century is divided up into decades. And as you can see, the vast majority of the coal capacity in the province, so over 60% of our capacity, is still allowed to run with no carbon limits at all, clear through this decade and the next decade. The federal coal regs actually allowed dirty, unmitigated coal until 2062. So let's just think about what that means in human terms for a second. It means that if you have a newborn baby this year, that baby could easily have a baby that has a baby before the last operating coal plant finally has to reduce a single ton of carbon. So if you're lucky enough to still be alive at that point, you'll be welcoming your great-grandchild into a Canada with dirty coal power. So reason number one that, that the trend is bad, the coal regulations in place are weak. They're weaker than weak. In fact, there is a fair case to be made that they don't actually do anything because by the coal industry's own admission, 50 years is 5 to 10 years more than what they accepted as an actual economic end of life for those units. So in other words, this regulation might actually be worse than useless. Next slide says business as usual. So reason number two for our increasing GHG trends over the next, until the middle of the century is that even as coal slowly retires over the next decades, natural gas takes its place. So this graph shows what the power industry expects our energy mix to look like between now and 2033, 20 years from now. And as the brown coal at the bottom gradually declines, the pinks in the middle, which are just different types of natural gas, grow very fast and become, the really large meat in that sandwich that you can see. And so we start with a system that is 64% coal and 20% natural gas today and end up with a system that's 64% natural gas and 20% coal. What do renewables do over that time in Alberta? Well, they increase to 11% of our mix, up from 10%. So, we're really just switching out fossil fuels as what is expected. And the reason this is happening is because Alberta's electricity market design provides bigger profits to power companies that invest in natural gas than to those that invest in renewables. And so this heavy reliance on natural gas that we end up with is not good for consumers, but it's great for power companies. Next slide. What's possible instead? So this is a part of an analysis that we did and we published with Clean Energy Canada, with Merran on stage there. And so So what it shows is the energy mix that we could have instead if we put our minds to it. So if we did just a fraction of what has already been done in other jurisdictions in the same amount of time on both coal reductions as well as on clean energy growth, this is the type of thing we could end up with. And it's really because Alberta has some of the best land-based wind and best solar resources in the country, as well as significant untapped hydro potential, significant biomass from our forestry and agricultural sectors, as well as geothermal opportunities in the province. So taking advantage of each of those makes the sort of mix that sees us actually addressing our climate impact instead of growing our electricity emissions, instead of meager reductions until 2030 and then an increase after, like I showed you a couple of slides ago. This mix sees a 70% decrease in carbon pollution from 2005 to 2030. And then it keeps falling thereafter. And so in 2033, this would be a 29 megaton reduction from the business as usual that we saw on the prior slide. And if this is possible, I'd encourage, in the room, you can toggle back and forth between the two because the graphs are set up so that you can kind of see what that change makes from business as usual with the big reliance on natural gas to a more diverse mix of sources. And this what's possible graph is the sort of energy mix that protects us from significant price risks. As you can see, instead of putting all our eggs in, or 2/3 of our eggs in one basket, like in the previous slide, we end up with a much more diverse set of baskets so that we aren't paying up the nose when natural gas prices rise, and we have a far cleaner energy system. And because this mix uses a lot of technologies that have no fuel costs, that essentially they essentially produce power for free once they're built. This portfolio would actually cost consumers less than the one on the prior slide. And so I'll go into my last slide here, which is a map of the province of Alberta. And just to leave you with one final co-benefit of doing this, getting away from talking about carbon for a second and talking about something that speaks to people, everyday families on Main Street in a more tangible sense and very immediate sense for them. What else do consumers save when they use this cleaner energy mix instead of that business as usual that I showed? Well, by phasing out coal sooner and replacing it with more clean energy development, we can make the air cleaner in downwind communities. And this shows where the coal units are located in Alberta. And so you can see 3/4 of the coal capacity in the province is found in 3 plants that are located west of Edmonton. And for any of those in the room from Alberta, you know which way the prevailing winds come from in Alberta. So in a recent publication we did last year that we published with health organizations like the Asthma Societies and Lung Association, this means over $300 million in health costs each year with the present coal fleet that we have, 145 premature deaths each year, and 19,600 asthma episodes each year from coal plants in Alberta. So not only can clean energy diversify our energy mix and attract 21st century technology investment, make meaningful reductions to our carbon emissions, and save people money on their utility bills and health costs, it can also help to ensure that the air is cleaner for that great-grandchild that I mentioned a few slides back. But to capture those opportunities, we need real policy measures because you saw what's going to happen under business as usual if we don't have those. And, there are oodles of policy measures available. So somewhat oddly, I'm not even going to get into those. But at both the provincial and federal level, there's plenty. And perhaps we can discuss that through questions if people are interested. But the real take-home here is that our political leaders don't lack for available policy options or technical solutions to our climate and air emissions problem. They just lack the political will to adopt them, at least so far anyway. And that's it for me for now. So thanks very much for your time.
All right. Do we have Dr. Weis's PowerPoint in both official languages? Yes, we do. All right. Thank you for your patience, Tim. And I think actually this may work well. So we do now have your presentations, or do we? Hang on. All right, we're ready to go. Tim, are you still with us?
I am, yes, thanks.
Thank you for waiting patiently. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Tim Weis is a professional engineer and the Alberta Regional Director for the Canadian Wind Energy Association, where he works on public policy, research and advocacy activities for Alberta's wind energy industry. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Tim Weis.
Great. Thank you very much. Bonjour tout le monde. Merci beaucoup pour l'invitation d'être ici aujourd'hui. Désolé que je ne pourrai être en endroit aujourd'hui, mais comme vous savez, c'est un temps assez intéressant dans la politique d'Alberta. Alors, je suis ici en Edmonton. Thank you very much for the invitation, and wish I could be there today, but again, we'll provide you, or I'll be able to provide you a little more context, a little more discussion about wind energy development in Alberta. And I'd like to say I orchestrated the technical difficulty there so I could come after Ben to talk because I think the wedge that he just showed on that graph that Clean Energy Canada and the Pembina Institute presented on the opportunity and the real scale for wind energy development, I think is an important one, because I think it's an interesting time in the industry that we've really moved to a technology that is a mature one and one that is ready to deliver big-scale reductions. So I'll flip to my next slide there, and I'm not sure how these are numbered on your end, but just a quick introduction to the wind energy industry, or CanWIA. So CanWIA, where I work now, represents the industry in Canada with 280 members ranging from all types of industry across the country. And so my role is to work on Alberta and prairie issues in terms of wind energy development on behalf of the industry. So the next slide, which says fast growth from coast to coast to coast, I think is an important one just to see how far and how quickly this industry has come along, and really what a success story it is more on a global scale. Because when I started doing this work about 15 years ago or so, this was still a hippie dream in terms of there was a lot more ponytails in the room and a lot more people trying to get backyard equipment running. But we really moved from sort of the margins into the mainstream in terms of, and that's not just in Canada, but that's globally. You can see just how quickly that happened. We're now at over 8,500 megawatts of installed capacity, and that represents about $17 billion of investment. So we are talking about a big industry and one that is still growing. So my next slide is just my own personal bio, and the reason I like to tell the story, and I'll apologize to Ben, who has heard this several times, but the reason I like to tell this story is because I think it's sort of emblematic of the industry writ large. And so when I started out in engineering as an engineer, and I really wanted to get into the wind energy and alternative energy, I guess. And when I graduated in the late 90s, I realized there wasn't a whole lot of jobs out there, and so I went into do a master's degree research because I figured it was at least the way I could continue to get in or stay into or dive into this industry, I guess. And so I did a master's degree, and then I went on to do PhD work. And the reason I'm telling this story is it was partway through my PhD work on remote communities and off-grid development that I really realized that, hey, you know what? It's not the technology that's the problem here. It's policies, and it's getting the policies right. And I think this goes back even to the point that Merran was making earlier on, is that you need to get the policies right in energy development. And this isn't renewable energy development. This is energy development writ large. We're still talking about energy policy for pipelines and for oil sands in this country. So this is not one type of energy versus another type of energy, but energy, because of its capital nature and its long-term scale, you need to get the policies right, and policy drives its development. And so that was really kind of a realization that I made in my own personal story, which is why I've moved from a technical focus into a policy focus. Because in so many cases, we need to stop thinking about renewable energy as an emerging technology or as high tech that's sort of 5 or 10 years away. But we really do have a lot of technology today that's ready to deliver. So my next slide, which says climate change on it, it is kind of the trajectory we're on as a country, and this is analysis that was put together by the Pembina Institute using Environment Canada data. Environment Canada some data, and you can kind of see it's pretty clear the trajectory we're on, which is there were some gains that were made, but we're moving in the wrong direction at this stage in the game, and we're significant ways off our international targets, whether it was our Kyoto one or more recent Copenhagen target. And so now the next slide, I think, hopefully there's a bit of sticker shock on that next slide, and that's the difference between what our international commitments we have made and what science is telling us, which is sort of on the order of an 80% reduction in carbon emissions over the next several decades. And the reason I want to mention that, and I don't want to dwell on climate change too much, but it's important to recognize that we're talking about a big change here. This isn't, a few wind turbines here and a few solar panels and a little bit of efficiency. We're talking about a major change, and so a lot has to happen. And frankly, there's some downsides with that. If we are talking about large-scale development, it means just that. There is large-scale development, and it is going to bring with it some difficulties because we are talking about a major change. So I think it's important to remember that this is a lot needs to happen. So on to my next slide. Electricity. Electricity is an important part of that solution, and I think if you've looked at any of the work that's been done in Canada, I know there's some really good work that's been done with the Truckee Energy Futures Project as one example that has looked at some of this work. That really the electricity system needs to be seen as one of the really key solutions to climate and to solving that problem. And that's actually one of the reasons that I recently joined the wind energy industry, or joined Canada, that is, because, coming to this realization that really this is a sector that needs to be seen as a solution, not only to itself in terms of solving, as Ben was saying, solving the emissions problem in Alberta or in Saskatchewan or other provinces that burn coal, but really the electricity system then needs to be clean enough that it can move into other traditional emitting sectors, and that's going to be into transportation, into buildings, heating, into processes, industrial processes, etc. And so I think we need to be thinking of the electricity system coast to coast to coast as much bigger than itself, and it's going. But the fact of the matter is, it's going to need to get bigger to solve that problem. And one of the reasons that that's the case is that we have mature technologies in the electricity sector that we can deploy quickly and that we can deploy at scale to really help solve this problem. The other good news is that particularly when it comes to some of the rapidly growing technologies, wind and solar in particular, the costs are still falling. And so even though we're in the wind case cost competitive already, the costs are still falling, and solar is right on our field, which is great. And I think this was mentioned earlier, but we're also starting from a strong position in Canada, where we've got a significant amount of low carbon electricity, and so we're starting from a good spot in many cases, such as Quebec and Manitoba, British Columbia. There's hydro that can help act as a buffer to other types of development, and so, or an integrator, I guess. And so I think we have a strong starting point to work from, but we obviously have a long ways to go. And so going back to my earlier point about electricity system being really a key solution to moving towards a clean energy economy, It comes down to obviously energy efficiency, because we only want to build the electricity system as big as we need it, so we need to be as efficient as possible. We need to move, we need to electrify, we need to be thinking about moving more things onto the grid for the reasons I mentioned earlier. Obviously, that only works if the system is renewable, and so we need to continue to ensure that the system becomes more and more renewable across the country. And then you've got to, repeat. So continue working on efficiency and continue to help out down that path. So my next slide, which is slide 8. So it really is, I guess the question is why wind, and why is it worth talking about wind? And so I'm obviously talking about the Alberta potential here, or the Alberta perspective here, but this is one snapshot, I think, of what's emblematic across the country, that we really have a massive resource. This was research that Dan Weir recently undertook in terms of the scale of wind energy development, and what you can see, I know that's kind of hard to read, but what you can see is in the bottom, which is really kind of the birthplace of wind energy in Canada, those blue streaks, and that's where it's just a fantastic wind regime. And I think by and large, people felt that was kind of the only area that wind energy made sense in Alberta. But thanks to much more modern mapping, but also big advances in technology, we're actually seeing that a huge swath of the province, and that's basically anything in the red there, it's got resource that's economically viable, technically viable to develop. And so what that means, if we wanted to, and I'm not saying we're going to do this, but in theory, if we wanted to, we could easily power Alberta 100% on wind energy. So it shows. Obviously, we're not going to do that, but the point being is the scale is there. And Alberta obviously has a great wind regime, but there's no. We know that the rest of the country does as well. So there really is a massive potential. I think that's one important takeaway. Also, we have incredibly advanced technology. The technology, to my surprise, just keeps advancing. And I think I remember when I started in this in the early 2000s that everyone kind of thought the 1 megawatt machine was going to be the plateau. Nothing was ever going to get bigger than that. And now we're talking about 10 megawatt machines in the offshore applications. To me, I keep thinking it's going to plateau, it's going to stop, costs have to stop coming down, or the costs have to stop coming down at some point in time, because we're going to start hitting physical limitations. But the industry does keep finding ways to bring costs down, and that's frankly a surprise to me, because I thought we were getting close to some of our limits. But we are seeing, it is an advanced technology. One of the other benefits of wind in particular is that you can build it quickly from start to finish. If you've got all your ducks in a row, you can get a project up and running almost from zero to blades turning within a 3 to 4 year time frame. That's much, much faster than some of the other large-scale projects, such as hydro, for example. We know we're price competitive now, which wasn't necessarily the case even 7 or 8 years ago. But now wind energy is actually becoming a technology of choice in many jurisdictions, not for environmental reasons, but purely for prices. And also that wind energy complements other types of technology, and I think you can see that on my next slide, which answers part of the question, why wind? And wind works. We actually know that it's a mature technology. We know we can do this at big scales, and you can see on the right there the level of wind. This is wind only. That many states that you see just south of us are actually getting annually already from wind energy. In Iowa, South Dakota, over a quarter of their power every year is already coming from the wind. And I think that's so we need to again stop thinking about renewables as sort of boutique solutions. On the left-hand side, that's actual data. I know it's a bit hard to read, but that's actual data from Germany, from the national grid scale. And you can see the blue is the wind, and on top of that, yellow is the solar production. And so you can see there at noon, you had wind and solar for over half of the entire country running purely on wind and solar. So important to, hopefully I'm driving the point home there that we can think big about these technologies. And we can do this at national scale. The next slide, which kind of goes to my earlier point, is that wind energy costs are still falling, and I think that's so it's important to. We obviously hear a lot about solar and how the costs of solar are coming down, and I think that's just fantastic, and I'm very looking forward to the day when we start seeing big solar development, and I know it's right around the corner. But I think it's also important to remember that we do have a mature technology already at a utility scale that also is still continuing to see price declines. This is American data on the left there. This is from the American Wind Energy Association. Their costs came down about over 50% just in the last 5 years, and so costs are still falling. And so that's good news, I think, that we have an opportunity with mature technology to kind of to make significant difference in the direction that we want to go. And again, back to my earlier point, I think we need to make sure we're thinking about electricity really as kind of an important station for all of us. So that really kind of sums up hopefully the key points that I want to make in all this, and I'll end up with just a couple of thoughts on what is the federal role, which is my next slide there. And I'll be honest that as an industry, we've kind of stopped thinking about the federal role over the last little bit because it's been tough sledding. And so we're starting to re-engage and starting to think about, well, one of the real struggles we have in Canada that we hear from our industry members is it's difficult to invest in Canada because we don't have one country, but we have 10 countries when it comes to energy jurisdictions. And so I do think there is an important federal role in helping to unify some of the development, helping to unify some of the thinking, and to make life easier for the companies that are going to be building out these technologies that we need. And so some areas, and I guess I should be fair, I should also acknowledge that the federal government did play a very important role, both the previous government as well as the current government in getting wind energy moved from the sidelines to the street. So I don't want to discount that really was important. But in the recent years, we have much movement. Anyway, so but a handful of thoughts on what the federal role could be going forward. I think storage is going to be an important area, and I think storage today is kind of where wind was 10 or 15 years ago, where you've got technology that's sort of on the cusp of maturity, but needs that help to get over the edge and into kind of the mainstream. And so that, I think that could be an important role for the federal government with the technology that we're going to need coast to coast to coast. Remote communities, which is my own personal area of interest, I think is an area that we all too often forget about. Canada has 300 remote communities, many of them Indigenous, across the north of many provinces and territories. And those are communities that rely heavily on diesel fuel for their energy, and so I think solving that problem is going to be important for those communities, but also, frankly, an important technological potential export for us. There's so many remote island and off-grid communities around the world. Right now, Alaska is kind of eating our lunch on that with a re-engineered Canadian technology that was developed in the 80s and 90s, and they've got 20 communities running on wind energy projects right now. So an area that I think we, as a federal government, given that that's important jurisdiction for the federal government, turns attention back to. Project financing, when it comes to renewable energy, one of our problems is that we're capital heavy and you need big dollars, and when you invest in these projects, you're all in up front. So getting financing can be a challenge, particularly true in Alberta, but across the country, and that would be another important role for the federal government. And lastly, I think as we said before, climate policy writ large is going to be, I think that the point that hopefully I made earlier on is that's going to be the overarching, and that needs to be the overarching framework under which we develop renewable energy policy, in which we develop the renewable energy industry, and can help to give kind of a line of sight and certainty around investment development. So we can't talk about climate policy enough and how important that's going to be, and having some certainty around where we're going. So with that, Thanks very much, and so sorry for my technical delays, but appreciate your time and interest, and look forward to the discussion fall. Thanks.
Oh my goodness. Let me turn this down a little bit. Thank you. Thanks very much, Tim. So I'm happy to report that notwithstanding 5 panelists, we still have about 20 minutes left for questions. And of course, there's a lot of people in the room who have a lot of knowledge and experience on these issues. So we have 2 microphones. We already have 2 folks at the microphones. I would remind everyone, everything's being translated, so if you could speak slowly and clearly, and if you could also identify both yourself and also the organization that you're with. So we'll take the first question over here on what is identified as mic 62 for reasons that are not entirely obvious to me.
Well, thank you very much to all the panelists for a great presentation. Dennis Bevington, a Member of Parliament for the Northwest Territories. I've done a lot of work on energy over the years, going back into the early 90s. There's been a lot of focus on Alberta here, and I think that's great because Alberta is really the energy hub of Canada. There was a statement made that there's not much we can do with the oil sands to improve their carbon footprint. In the early 90s, the oil sands themselves produced a report on the production of hydrogen from electrolysis. This report was based on $1.25 natural gas at the time, without any preparation towards the reduction of carbon. So what we have is what we've seen from Tim Weis is there's a huge wind opportunity in Alberta, but there isn't a storage system, and there isn't a use for excess electricity. But there really is, because Alberta is the largest producer of hydrogen in the world, because every barrel of bitumen needs 25% of the hydrogen either added or the carbon taken away. So there is an opportunity there and I'd love to hear Pembina speak to this, because in the future we need to find answers to our industrial systems as well, and renewable energy has to fit in. Storage is one thing, but the use of the renewables to replace carbon-intensive products is another one, and I think Alberta has an answer there. It hasn't been looked at for almost 20 years, and I think there's a need to re-examine that option.
Thank you, Dennis. Ben, it seems like that question was to some extent directed at you. Do you want to comment on that first?
Sure. Other people might have some thoughts, but I'm happy to react initially. I mean, I think that, you know, at the present state of affair, if you're using electricity in the province to create hydrogen through hydrolysis and make use of that, you know, we're leaning on an electricity system that is currently a dirty electricity system. So, you know, at present, it might not be the best way to reduce GHGs, but if, as Mr. Bevington said, if you're creating a demand for renewable electricity, and that this could be something that could advance renewables, make use of renewables at a time when we have, you know, excess electricity on the grid, that makes sense. But you know, as a first step, we really need to improve the grid electricity in Alberta to make it more clean, to make those options possible. And then from there, we have a whole variety of options that are really interesting and really exciting. So from, you know, a whole number of different, you know, a whole slate of different types of storage options that would be really great for improving our use of renewables. You know, and among those, you know, there is some interesting stuff being done by Enbridge on hydrolysis to create hydrogen that then can be actually mixed into the natural gas transmission and distribution system. So natural gas pipelines can carry a certain proportion of hydrogen in amongst the natural gas, and then you use that hydrogen as energy elsewhere. So it's kind of like, the idea is for it to be, you know, renewable natural gas is the idea, and then we can heat our homes partly from clean electricity, from renewable electricity, by using this hydrogen in our homes or by producing electricity from it when we need the electricity more at different times. So those types of options are definitely, some of the things that we could be looking at. And as Tim spoke to, electrifying transportation, electrifying some of our energy inputs that are needed in our oil and gas system. Those are all the types of things that we're going to need to do in order to ultimately decarbonize our economy even further. And so that just speaks to the importance of making sure that the grid electricity we have in the province is as clean as possible in order to take advantage of those electrification opportunities.
Thank you, Ben. And if everyone could please keep their answers relatively short. I think Céline and Merran had some brief comments to make on the question.
Yes, I'd just like to instantiate the hydrogen opportunity in some industrial capacity in Canada. In fact, the world thinks Canada is a global leader in hydrogen-related technologies, and so we should think of ourselves as that. I hope you do. And some of those companies are companies that have the potential to become $100 million, $200 million, $500 million companies. So let's bear in mind our industrial capacity.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add that the concept of power storage, any kind of power storage, is really one of the nuts to crack in this clean energy transition, and Canada could be a global leader there. There's some simple things the government can do. One, tax breaks to power storage infrastructure, the kinds of clean energy tax breaks that are needed, and secondly is R&D and innovation, because this is going to be a huge export product for whoever figures out the best power storage technology.
Question, Mike 51.
Hi there. I'm Vincent Lauerman from the Conference Board of Canada. I actually also have a question for Ben Thibault. He laid out a business-as-usual case for the electric power industry in Alberta, as well as a preferred case from an environmental perspective with a high degree of wind power. The question I have for Ben is that, from my understanding, in wintertime, wind output isn't all that great given the cold weather and the lack of wind. So what we're talking here is not just a short-term storage issue, which was just mentioned, but a long-term storage issue for for electric power. How do you foresee that being dealt with under your scenario?
Ben, if you could answer that briefly. We have a lot of folks lined up at the mics. Thank you.
Okay, and I might just quickly pass it to Tim after just saying that, in Alberta we actually have, pretty good wind during the winter, but it is true that doesn't necessarily line up with load. And so storage would be a critical part of this mix that I have here. We would definitely need to advance storage, but that's not to say, with the amount of natural gas that we have here, which is simple cycle in particular, which is highly responsive natural gas, we can definitely integrate this amount of wind into our system without posing any major technical difficulties. But Tim might have some more to say.
Yeah, just really quickly, the winds are actually stronger in the winter in Alberta for a couple of reasons. One of which is the cold weather, because when it gets cold, the air actually gets denser, and so you actually get more energy out of the wind in the winter. So, and I guess I just want to storage has come up a couple of times, and I think it's important to know that we actually have. It will be something we probably need in the medium to longer term, but it really isn't something that's holding us back at all in the short term. We have enough redundancy in our systems already. Alberta, there was the numbers done by the electric system operator that show that Alberta could easily double and almost triple its wind fleet before with the existing system. So while storage is something we need to be thinking about, I think it's important to recognize that it's. I don't want people to leave this thinking that it's the rate determining step at this stage in the game. We have a long way to go, and I think you can see some of the numbers from the United States illustrate that.
Question on Mike 62.
Yes. Will Dubitsky, retired, formerly with the Government of Canada on sustainable development issues, and a member of Harper's Enemies List before I was with the federal government. I found that we're taking an approach here that I find too optimistic with respect to Canada in that it doesn't recognize the speed at which changes are going on elsewhere. One of you mentioned China at the beginning and its extraordinary progress. Well, in new solar and wind installations, for new additional wind and solar capacity in 2013 was 28 gigawatts. That's more than half of the total electricity production of Quebec, and they did that in one single year. Add to that, things are changing because they're migrating to a green economy, and for the first time in as long as we can remember, coal consumption is down. The projection is coal will be 14% down by the end of 2014 compared to 2013. Third, China is very aggressive on migration to green vehicles. 30% of federal government vehicles purchased beginning 2016 will be electric vehicles. They have a $16 billion program to set up electric charging stations across the country. They've removed the tax, the purchase tax on electric vehicles. California has similar type of policies that are aggressive with respect to electric vehicles. In Quebec, and in British Columbia, we actually have a surplus of clean electricity. This electricity could be used to address the challenges associated with the transportation sector. Yet the government of Quebec has pulled out the $500 million from the previous government had allotted to development of the electrical sector, despite the fact that there's an emerging electrical vehicle industrial base in that province. Looking a little elsewhere, we see Europe has 3.5 million jobs in the green sectors, 1.2. Okay. Just saying that Canada is really falling behind each year at an extraordinary rate, and we don't have our act together anywhere in this country to put it all together.
Maybe we'll make some closing comments on that. Question on Mike on the left side, please.
Thank you. Dr. Michel, I'm at the University of Calgary. There are two white elephants that we haven't pointed to. And it's important to recognize white elephants in the room because they change how we get settled and deal with what goes on in that room. One is the science. The science is very clear. This is a severely time-limited issue. And scientists in Germany, led by Minh-Thu, has found out that in order to keep below 2 degrees centigrade, we have a carbon budget of 565 gigatons, which if you take our increases 3 billion a year times 3% a year, that means 2028, 14 years. And in terms of our gradual incremental shift, some turbines here, some solar panels, that is not good news. We have to have a substantial change. Second piece, and I'm going to just put this out there and ask anyone on the panel to respond to what this means in terms of our strategic objectives. Second piece is the investment industry is already starting to get rid of high-risk, carbon-intensive investments. You take Storebrand, which is manages pension funds for much of Scandinavia. A year ago last summer, they divested themselves of 19 companies, 13 were coal, 6 were oil sands companies. Because they're environmentalists? No, because of their fiduciary responsibility to recognize that those are too high risk and they need to divest from them. So we have a science piece as well in terms of time limited and that we need substantive change. Small incremental growth is too little, too late. We've already are paying the procrastination penalty. But on the other hand, we have substantial push from the investments saying we need to divest, like we did with South Africa, and we need to reinvest in clean technology. What does that mean, not in terms of science or anything else, but in terms of our strategic objectives for the next 10 years, if we're going to meet the science demands, but also integrate this strong push from the investment sector?
I think Merran, at least initially, has some comments on that.
Yeah, so I just wanted to say that I think, and also a bit to speak to the last person who was speaking, is that what's great is we actually have a real opportunity here in Canada. It's not like we're dependent on oil, both for a source of energy, oil and gas, or for our economy. We all know the oil sands contributes 2% to our GDP. And I guess what the story we're trying to say is, and in fact, we are well positioned not only to shift our own energy consumption, our electricity, and as was mentioned, to shift to electric vehicles, because taking that transportation carbon out of our carbon budget, our personal carbon budget here in Canada, is a significant piece. And we are well positioned to shift to electric vehicles because we have a wealth of renewable energy that we would run those on. And that's why we made this. I was going to say, the stat that I had on the jobs, we turned into a little Twitter postcard because we just figured it out yesterday, so it didn't get in the PowerPoint presentation. But for anybody who wants to tweet this out, you can go to @MerranSmith and you'll see it. I tweeted it out just before I came in here, so you can retweet it. But we need to get this story out to Canadians, and I think one of the biggest obstacles is that we don't believe that we can both reduce our emissions and come out of it economically alive and come out of it with good jobs. And one of the studies that was done in BC by KPMG was, the average job in the renewable energy sector in British Columbia pays from $70,000 to $120,000, and they're local jobs. You don't have to get on a plane and go to Alberta. Renewable energy is distributed, and so you can work in your local community, get a decent wage, and be part of this clean energy sector. So I think that's the story we need to get out to people, so they're confident that Canada's future, their well-being, can still be intact while we tackle climate.
Julian?
I'd like to add, I think, to Merran's very comprehensive answer, that economists are a pivotal sort of institution in all of this, and that's why I put GDP up there and why I wrote that we have $129 billion in oil and gas exports, because we at the moment have good models to understand the impact of regulation on energy systems, but we do not have economic models that are able to represent the upside. I mean, I've spoken to many, and we have the economic data that we think should fit into the models that are out there, and the answer is no, they can't integrate the upside. And so we need, I think, an institutional capacity of some kind to get to the point where we're comfortable with the economic modeling of the transition. And I come across, everywhere I go, people who want to do the right thing, don't have the right data, can't make the policy decisions, and they're stuck. So I think there's an institutional gap, and unfortunately an institution that has to appear within a very short time because of what you said.
If I can add one thing real quickly, one thing I think is important to remember is that exponential curves can grow pretty quickly, and we need, I think, ought to be paralyzed by the scale of the task at hand. And so it, even though maybe we're not moving as fast as we can, we do need to accept incremental changes in the right direction as well, because those incremental changes can lead to big things, and I think we've seen that in both the wind, but as well as the solar industry. And so let's not be paralyzed by thinking it needs to be one big hammer solution, but we do need a lot of exponential curves to be moving.
Question?
Thank you. My name is Frances Deverell. I'm a retired Unitarian minister and a member of Climate Fast. We've been fasting on Parliament Hill for the last 5 days and broke our fast last night. And we were just so privileged to be invited to this meeting by Peter Julian. I have never been more heartened since I started fasting annually on the Hill 3 years ago. To hear that all the things we're trying to tell people, that all these things are possible, really are possible. Yay. I'm going to make bullet points, and I'm not going to defend my positions because in lieu of time. The first thing I want to say is we have to leave 4/5 of the tar sands oil in the ground. The second thing I want to say is we have to negotiate a treaty with Russia that neither one of us will develop the new find in the Arctic. The third thing I want to say is the technology things are very important, and it's wonderful to hear the possibilities, and I totally agree about the direction of development in storage. We have to add the development in smart electrical grids and systems to that. There's so many potential good high jobs, and we are bombarded in the media by defense of the oil sands, and we have nothing for ads on the power of jobs in renewable energy. So I would really like to see the big umbrella start putting some ads on TV to compete with those ads that Harper's putting out there, unfortunately, at our expense. Media is a big issue. The general population is a big issue. The psychology, the knowledge, the understanding, we have to work on that side really hard. And one of the areas, my question is for Tim, and it's on wind. And to me, the resistances I hear constantly are in the area of birds and vibrations. I'm wondering how those resistances publicly are affecting your business, how you're dealing with them, and how you propose that we educate the public about wind.
Tim, if you could make your answer very brief, please.
It's going to be a hard one to make very brief. Maybe if I can, just the fastest way I can probably answer that question. We have a webpage called windfacts.ca, and it really goes through a lot of the issues there. Not to say there aren't ongoing challenges, and we're working the best we can to resolve them. But I think those challenges also need to be put in the context of the overarching challenge that we're up against. And I think that was the point I was trying to make earlier on, that we are talking about a significant amount of development that's going to happen, and that is going to bring with it challenges.
I think Michel had some comments.
Windfacts.ca is the webpage that has the answers on there.
Michel?
Yeah. Well, first of all, wind can have impact, but I think it's very important to study where you would put the wind farm. In our own experience, we have 5 years monitoring program on our wind farm in Gaspé Peninsula, and we have no issue of birds. There's many places that they have issue of bird and vibration, but I think that a good developer, an experienced developer, and also good civil servant that have experience in where to put the wind farm is very important. So you need to be careful. Even renewable energy can have impact. It depends where we put them. So I think that we have to get wiser and wiser and learn from our experience so that the future wind farm won't have any problem with birds and vibration.
So I think we really only have time for one more question because we've got to take the coffee break. So last question, please.
Lucky me. My name is Jeff Stiles. I'll be very brief. I'm a consultant in the area of what I now call low carbon energy in my latest incarnation. I have a question for Michel, specifically on the carbon side of things. You mentioned offsets in your presentation. You're doing a lot of your work in Quebec, which is a member of the Western Climate Initiative. I'd like to know, from a business perspective, to what extent carbon financing, sale of offsets, figures in your investment plans currently and in future.
That's a good question. In Quebec, we have this initiative that the government have taken, and I'm saluting it. For the time being, it has not been translated in our own business because whatever we're selling right now, Hydro-Québec is buying the green attributes. Matter of fact, we're dealing with Hydro-Québec in order to resell some of these green attributes. We have had an experience in Ontario where we are selling green attributes with a small hydro facility called Badawa Falls. And it's meaningful. We're getting about $200,000 a year from a 5-megawatt facility. So, you know, it's probably 5% of our revenue. In BC, we got to have roughly in our EPA with BC Hydro close to half a cent per kilowatt hour on the green attributes. So in Canada, it's getting there, but obviously if there's no policy to create or to enforce a limitation and cap, obviously there's no value, you know, the offer and demand. If you don't create the demand, then even if we have offer, we don't get a lot of money for it. So obviously policy would be very welcome. And obviously if we can get a little bit of revenue from carbon side, that will help being more competitive. Mind you that as we were mentioning, the electricity produced by wind is coming down. Matter of fact, there's a call in Quebec, and I think that without naming the price of electricity, people will be very surprised, happily surprised to see the new price of electricity in Quebec coming from wind. And this call is forcing the developer to be 50% partner with municipality and First Nation. So it's great. Even with that enforcement, the cost of electricity will be very, very competitive. So I'm very, very enthusiastic about that call, so that people will get that renewable energy is becoming more and more competitive. And if we can have revenue from the green attributes, it would be even better.
So I think that's all the time we have for this excellent session. I want to take this opportunity and to thank all of our panelists who made excellent presentations, as well as to thank Peter Julian in particular and his office for inviting us all here and for hosting this terrific event. So this is just the first panel of the day. I look forward to many more interesting discussions. And I think if there's one takeaway that I take from this discussion, it's that there are enormous opportunities for Canada in renewable energy, but that at the moment, frankly, we're not taking full advantage of those opportunities, and that we require more government leadership, and if I can be particular, federal government leadership in this area in order to truly both meet our climate change targets, but also grow and create good green jobs and a good, true green economy for the 21st century in Canada. So the coffee and stuff is over there, and I think we're back at 11:15. Thanks again.
Thanks for having us.